Imagine waking up strapped to a chair, your head pounding, your memory completely blank, and a robotic voice calmly informing you that you have exactly 90 minutes left to live. No lawyer, no jury, no appeal, just an artificial intelligence calculating the odds that you murdered your own wife. And the worst part? Every piece of evidence in the entire city is already pointing directly at you. This is the nightmare a hardened detective is about to live through. And trust me, the twist at the end of this movie is going to leave your jaw on the floor. So make sure you stick around till the very end, because what looks like an open-end shut case is actually hiding the darkest secret imaginable. At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to a near-future Los Angeles that has basically collapsed under the weight of its own crime. Homelessness is everywhere, jobs are scarce, and the streets have turned into a war zone. The prisons are bursting at the seams, entire neighborhoods have been sealed off as red zones, and thousands of police officers have been buried in the line of duty. The system is broken, and the city is desperate for a solution. That's when the Department of Justice rolls out something nobody has ever seen before. They call it the Mercy Court. It's a courtroom run entirely by an artificial intelligence, designed to handle capital crimes the moment they happen. No long trials, no waiting years for justice, no expensive lawyers playing games. The AI looks at the evidence, runs the numbers, and delivers a verdict within hours. And here's the chilling part. In this courtroom, you are guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. 2 years go by, and the program is being celebrated as a miracle. 18 people have already been convicted and executed by this machine. Crime in Los Angeles has dropped by a staggering 68%. Politicians love it, the public loves it, and most importantly, the cops love it. Among those cops is a sharp detective from the LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division named Chris Raven. He was actually one of the earliest supporters of the Mercy program, and he personally delivered the very first defendant ever to face the AI. Little does he know, fate is about to flip his world completely upside down. We cut to Chris suddenly opening his eyes, completely disoriented, and realizing he's the one strapped into the defendant's chair. Standing before him is Judge Maddox, the artificial intelligence that has executed 18 human beings without breaking a sweat. Chris starts panicking, shouting his name, his rank, anything to make sense of what's happening. Maddox just calmly tells him to breathe. She informs him that his blood alcohol level has finally dropped to a level acceptable for trial. That alone tells Chris something is horribly wrong because he's supposedly been sober for years. Then comes the bombshell. Maddox tells him he's on trial for the murder of his own wife, Nicole Raven. Chris refuses to believe it. He demands proof, and that's when Maddox plays the body cam footage. We see an officer storming into a kitchen. Chris's young daughter, Britt, is sobbing on the floor next to her dying mother. The officer leans down and asks Nicole who attacked her. With her last breath, Nicole whispers a single name. Chris. Maddox lays out the math. Based on every available piece of evidence, his probability of guilt sits at a brutal 97.5%. That's 17.5 points above the threshold needed to throw someone into Mercy Court. She informs him that if he can knock that number down to 92%, he survives. If not, in 90 minutes, a sonic pulse will end his life right there in that chair. To give him a fighting chance, Maddox grants him access to something called the municipal cloud. Every device, every camera, every email, every phone in the city is required by law to be linked to it, and Chris can use voice commands and touch controls to dig through anything he needs. The clock starts ticking, and Chris realizes he's about to investigate his own murder case against himself. Maddox begins by walking him through his own morning. He arrived at work at 8:51, but instead of going inside, he turned around and drove straight back home. The doorbell camera shows him begging Nicole to open the door. She refuses, telling him she's done and that he can talk to her through her lawyer. Chris uses his own key to let himself in. 26 minutes pass. He leaves. Shortly after, his daughter Britt comes home from sleepover and finds her mother bleeding out on the kitchen floor. The forensic data is brutal. Nicole was stabbed during the exact window Chris was inside. The killer was right-handed just like Chris. The wound was so deep, it ruptured her liver. Nicole's blood was found on Chris's shirt. His fingerprints are on the knife. And after leaving the house, instead of calling the police or rushing to a hospital, Chris went straight to a bar and drank himself into oblivion. The footage shows him violently resisting arrest before officers finally cuffed him and knocked him in the head, possibly explaining why his memory is a complete blur. Chris is drowning. He can't remember a single thing. He starts crying, asking to speak to his daughter. Maddox tells him Britt is staying with her grandparents, and any contact must go through formal channels. While that request is being processed, Maddox allows him to call his AA sponsor, a man named Rob Nelson, who has been keeping him sober for 2 years and happens to work at Viking Shipping, the same company where Nicole worked. Rob sounds devastated. He tells Chris everyone at the office is in shock and gently scolds him for not calling when he felt the urge to drink. Before Chris can really explain himself, Maddox cuts the call short. Her cold logic is that the call's only purpose was to address his relapse, and Chris failed to use that support. Then Maddox really twists the knife. She tells Chris she already knows everything about his marriage. She plays a montage of his life with Nicole, the dating, the wedding, the birth of their daughter, all those happy years. But then we see the turning point. Chris's partner, a guy named Ray, was killed during a shooting on a hit-and-run case. Chris had been about to investigate himself, but Nicole called him, so Ray went in his place and got shot dead. Chris drove him to the hospital, begging him to hold on. Ray didn't make it. The suspect, a man named Alex, was never convicted. That guilt destroyed Chris and pushed him back into the bottle. Maddox then reveals something even more painful. Over the past 6 months, Nicole sent 57 messages to friends and family complaining about Chris losing his temper. She was apparently considering divorce. Then Maddox plays a video Britt secretly recorded for a hidden Instagram account, where the teenager tearfully tells her followers that her dad has gotten genuinely scary and her mom cries herself to sleep. The picture being painted of Chris is monstrous, and his guilt rate just keeps climbing. Britt finally accepts a video call. She's a wreck. She asks Chris why he's in mercy court if he was supposedly at work. Her grandfather, Jeff, has already told her that nobody ends up in that chair unless they're guilty. Before Chris can defend himself, Jeff appears and ends a call. Chris is furious, telling Maddox that Jeff has hated him from day one and is poisoning his daughter against him. Maddox just stares back and reminds him that anger won't save his life. The clock keeps ticking. Desperate, Chris asks to speak to his partner, Detective Jack Dio. Jack pops up on screen and tells him straight up that he's in a world of trouble. She warns him that if the evidence keeps stacking up, she won't lie to protect him because the program needs every conviction to mean something. A cop getting away can't be the message. Still, she helps him work the scene. Maddox projects a full virtual reconstruction of his kitchen. They see a broken vase, footprints from his daughter, and a knife pulled from the counter. Everything still points to a crime of passion committed by Chris. Then Chris asks about Nicole's phone records. Maddox pulls up a virtual copy of her phone, breaking down who she communicated with most. Then Chris remembers something. A week earlier, he caught Nicole texting somebody, and they argued about it. He asks Maddox to search Britt's videos for clues, but the number doesn't show up anywhere. He asks about a work phone. Maddox says Nicole only had one phone in the system. But right at that moment, Jack radios in. They just found a second phone hidden inside Nicole's car. A burner phone, unregistered, off the grid. Maddox scans the device through Bluetooth. The burner has only one contact, another burner phone. She calls it. The second the person on the other end hears Mercy Capital Court, they hang up and bolt. Maddox traces the signal to the Hollywood Red Zone, specifically the Hudson Hotel. Jack races over there and corners a man trying to slip out the back. His name is Patrick. He's a chef at the hotel, and he was clearly having an affair with Nicole. Chris's guilt rate barely budges. Patrick is innocent. Hotel kitchen cameras prove he was at work the entire morning Nicole was stabbed. Patrick admits everything, though. He met Nicole at a farmer's market. They started seeing each other regularly. He got her the burner phone so they could talk privately. And then he twists the blade emotionally, telling Chris that all Nicole ever wanted was somebody who would actually listen to her. And Chris had stopped doing that a long time ago. Now, this is where things get even darker, because Maddox calmly informs Chris that this discovery has actually increased his guilt rate. Why? Because instead of finding another suspect, he just handed the court a stronger motive. A jealous husband who found out his wife was cheating? That's the oldest murder motive in the book. Maddox accuses him of running this entire investigation just so he could meet the man who slept with his wife. Cornered, Chris finally breaks down and confesses something he's been hiding. He admits he had been failing Nicole for months. He'd started drinking again about a year ago, hiding bottles in his car. That very morning, Nicole had finally found his stash and thrown it out. That's why he came home. They fought. He smashed her favorite vase in a rage. A piece of glass flew up and cut her, which is why her blood was on his shirt. After that, his memory goes black. He looks at Maddox, completely defeated, and says that maybe in his rage, he really did grab a knife. Maddox tells him if he confesses, she'll lock the verdict in and he can just wait for the timer to run out. But something inside Chris refuses to give up. He pushes forward and asks Patrick if Nicole was dealing with anything strange at work. That single question cracks the case wide open. Patrick remembers that Nicole had been investigating a theft at Viking Shipping. Somebody had been stealing chemicals from shipments, and a customer had filed a complaint. Her boss asked her to look into it quietly. Nicole hated snooping, but she was doing it anyway. Chris dives into Nicole's emails and finds repeated mentions of something called UG. Maddox identifies it as urea grande, a chemical that just happens to be a key ingredient in producing methamphetamine on the black market. Over 6 months, more than 300 kilos had vanished from shipments going to a company called Bio Beauty. The physical inventory was correct, but the paperwork had been altered to cover the theft. Somebody at Viking Shipping was running a meth operation right under everyone's nose. The first suspect that pops up is a man named Holt. He had a serious gambling problem, and Chris finds an email where Holt urgently demanded a meeting with Nicole right before her death. Even better, financial records show that Rob, Chris's loyal sponsor, had transferred Holt $4,000. Chris thinks he's cracked it. Holt was stealing chemicals to pay off gambling debts. Nicole found out, and he killed her to keep her quiet. Chris's guilt rate finally starts dropping. He calls Viking Shipping, but Holt picks up the phone instead of Rob. Chris confronts him directly, accusing him of the murder. Holt panics, but then says something that changes everything. He tells Chris that Rob was the real thief. Holt and Nicole had both figured it out, but they didn't report it because Rob had always been good to them. Rob even helped Holt pay off his debts. The $4,000 transfer wasn't suspicious. It was Rob covering his tracks and making Holt feel grateful enough to keep his mouth shut. Then comes another revelation. Rob had called in sick that very morning. Nobody had seen him for hours. The last time Holt saw him was at a barbecue at Chris's house the previous Sunday, where Rob hung back to talk to Nicole privately and reassure her that everything was fine. Rob had also given his car keys to Holt that day, so other co-workers could get rides home, meaning Rob had a way to slip away unnoticed. Chris remembers something his daughter had said. The night before the murder, Britt had been recording a video and heard a door close somewhere in the house. She thought it was her dad coming home, but Chris was still at the precinct. Then he checks the bird cam from his neighbor Bill's house, the one that overlooks his backyard. It catches motion at strange times, and the basement door in his own house was slightly ajar in Britt's video. The horrifying truth hits him. The killer never left after the barbecue. He had been hiding inside the house since Sunday, waiting for the right moment to strike. But why? Why would Rob do this? Maddox tracks his vehicle to his home, and SWAT teams blast through the door. Rob is gone. He's removed the GPS tracker. Inside the garage, officers find burned papers and stashes of urea grande. Then they find a manual, bomb-making instructions. Chris's blood runs cold. Maddox scans every available traffic camera and finally spots Rob behind the wheel of a truck loaded with 3,000 pounds of explosives. He's heading straight toward downtown Los Angeles. And sitting in the passenger seat is a young man named David Webb, the very first defendant Chris ever sent to Mercy Court 2 years ago, the first person ever executed by Maddox. David Webb is Rob's younger brother, separated through adoption, which is why their last names didn't match. The whole picture finally becomes clear, and it is absolutely chilling. This was never about Nicole. Rob targeted Chris from the beginning. He intentionally found Chris at an AA meeting, became his sponsor, gained his trust, infiltrated his life, and waited 2 long years for the perfect moment to make him suffer the same way David did. Killing Nicole was just the bait. The real target is the Mercy Court itself, and Chris is meant to die in the same chair where his brother died, knowing he's innocent. Then Chris realizes Britt isn't answering her phone. He pulls up the doorbell camera and sees Rob calmly chatting with his daughter on the porch before grabbing her and shoving her into the truck. Chris loses it. He orders Jack to chase the truck down. Just then, an explosion rocks Rob's house, killing several officers who were searching the garage. Chris's guilt percentage finally drops to 0. He's officially innocent. But here's where this movie really sets itself apart. Chris refuses to end the trial. If the trial closes, he loses access to the entire surveillance grid. People are going to die. Maddox glitches as she struggles with the request because it goes against her programming. Chris convinces her by admitting they've both failed people they were supposed to protect, and this is their one chance to make it right. Maddox agrees. The chase reaches a bridge. Tactical teams want to take Rob out before he reaches downtown. Jack, now the incident commander, gives the order to shoot to kill. Chris screams, reminding her his daughter is in that truck. The team ignores him. At the last possible second, Maddox hijacks Jack's vehicle and saves Britt's life. Rob barrels through and crashes the truck right into the front entrance of Mercy Court itself. Rob steps out, opens fire, and screams for Chris. He says this ends here, with the judge, the court, and Chris all together. Chris confronts him face to face. Rob makes his case. His brother David was a drug addict, sure, but he wasn't a murderer. The night David was supposedly killing a woman named Valerie, Rob was on the phone with him. He even called the precinct that night to confirm it. A woman answered and promised to check the call logs. Britt suddenly bites Rob's hand, and Chris lunges forward, ripping the detonator away. Then Jack shoots Rob without warning. Chris orders her to stand down, but the damage is done. With his dying breath, Rob keeps insisting he made that phone call. Maddox checks the records. There absolutely was an incoming call from Rob to the precinct that night. And the officer who took it, the officer who processed and booked David Webb into evidence, was Jack. Chris turns slowly toward his partner. Maddox pulls up old body cam footage from the evidence room. There's Jack, calmly walking in, taking David's phone from evidence, and tossing it away forever. The phone that would have proven David's alibi. She framed an innocent man. And when Chris confronts her, she doesn't even deny it. She just argues that Mercy Court was working. Crime had dropped. Sometimes, she says, sacrifices have to be made. Officers immediately arrest both Jack and Rob. The film ends on the most haunting note possible. Maddox appears on screen and quietly asks Chris what they have done. Chris looks at her and tells her that whether you're human or artificial intelligence, you make mistakes and you lie. Maddox whispers back that yes, they do. And then she shuts herself down. Think about that for a second. An AI built to be perfect, designed to never feel anything, finally understanding that it executed an innocent boy because the human officer who fed it evidence was corrupt. The whole concept of Mercy Court was supposed to remove human error from justice. But in the end, a single dirty cop poisoned the entire system. Rob spent 2 years plotting revenge for a brother who really was innocent. And even though his methods were monstrous, he wasn't entirely wrong about what happened. Justice failed. Twice.